the numbers shrink very quickly. And that's why we have this war for talent, because the war for talent really is among a relatively narrow band of globally competitive people. Now, going back to Tsinghua, my final comment, two final comments. This year I have so many people applying for the course that I've decided to have sort of several levels of interviewing. And I've got people interviewing for me to get it down to 400, and then I can start. So I was talking last night to my colleague who's there interviewing all day long, and I said, so what are you learning? Well, what really strikes me is how these people are insecure about job prospects. In Tsinghua's case, it's not they're insecure about getting any job, it's insecure about getting the job they want to get. And he says, not surprising, this year China will graduate 4.95 million people out of college. That's 825,000 more than a year ago. And to put that in context, in 2001, China graduated 1.15 million. So on the one hand, the number of graduates is coming up extraordinarily quickly, which obviously is good news. On the other hand, when you look at, again, what's the nature and the quality of the education, what do these people know when they get out of school, what can they actually do, you get a different story. So you have this kind of schizophrenia among the young, where on the one hand they feel great opportunity. I sometimes accuse them of having the butterfly complex of too much opportunity, where they're kind of like this all the time. And on the other hand, their personal experience with the globally competitive world is it's very tough to get a job. And in my own experience, the multinationals in particular are often turning away very talented people because English language problem or some other problem that they see. They don't fit neatly into a box, which I think is a mistake on the multinational part, but we can come back to that. So finally, purpose of this session. The purpose of this session is to mutually educate one another in this room, because we have got so much expertise here, so I'm expecting you to participate not only with questions but with comments and answers. And secondly, to inspire each of us individually and collectively to do more than we're currently doing to help solve these problems. Now, we said earlier I'm going to introduce the panelists. It's true, but I'm going to be the quickest introducer in the world because I don't want to take too much time away from the substance. You all can read, you've all seen what's said about each one of our panelists. We have an extraordinary group here. We're going to go in this order. We have, the way I look at this, 15, 20 years of on-the-ground, in-depth experience from the best technology companies in the world. Cisco, Microsoft, Google, HP, covered by these two gentlemen. And we also have depth and breadth, covered by Michael as the president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Beijing. So we're going to get I think a very good cross-section going across as well as going down. I've asked each panelist to talk for, I said 5 minutes, and they corrected me and said 5 to 10 minutes, so we'll see. 5 to 10 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to discussion and questions. So I'm going to start with Jia-Bin. Thank you.
In September 2005, then New York Governor George Pataki was finishing up a trip to China, was through Shanghai, and the American Chamber of Commerce hosted a lunch for him. And during that lunch, I asked him, what's your impression of China? What are you going to take back to New York State? He started off by saying, New York's a great state, full of great people, all kinds of people. He said there's one guy he'd seen outside the subway stop down on Wall Street, he thought might be a little bit out on the fringe. But after his trip to China, he'd changed his mind. He said the guy standing outside the Wall Street subway station holding up a sign that says, "Learn Mandarin." I thought it was really good advice. That's the advice I give to my kids, but that's not enough to really address the issues we're talking about here, about human resources. The American Chamber of Commerce has about 2,400 members, corporate members and individual members. It's one of the largest, most influential business associations in China. Each year we do an annual white paper, and the next one's coming out in about 10 days. You can download it from the internet. Part of that is a business climate survey that we've been doing since 1999. For the last 3 or 4 years, when we ask our companies, what is the #1 operational problem that you face in China, 70% of them say human resource constraints. It's not just in the government, it's way down into our companies as well. We also ask them, do you think this is getting better? Is it staying the same or getting worse? Last year, 1/4 said it's getting worse. This year, we'll report probably next week that it's gone up to 1/3 are saying the problem's getting worse, it's not getting better. How can that be? If you follow statements out of the Chinese government, they have a huge labor surplus. They're worried about finding enough jobs for people. As John pointed out initially, I think there's a surplus of labor, but there's a mismatch in skill, experience, and location. Why is that? you've heard a lot about the economic growth in China. Over the last 20 years, China's economic growth only twice has dipped as low as the highest we've seen here in the United States over that time. There's no let-up in the foreign investment going into China. CEOs go to China and they find their companies growing 20% a year, but the market may be growing 40% and they're losing share. There's also expectations. Here in the US, my career may peak in my 50s or 60s. I've had Chinese employees tell me, where I'm at 35 is where I'll be for the rest of my career. Manager, president, whatever. That leads to a lot of turnover. Beijing last year, 14%. As you move up into R&D, it's even higher. 11% of our companies are involved in R&D, and that number is going to go up this year. So what do companies do? Many have university programs, like you've just heard about, cooperation programs to hire the best. Also, branding your company as employer of choice. Knowledge management programs become extremely important. Think about this. Your corporate headquarters in the United States, the turnover is usually single digits. The tenure, the length of time people are there, is double digits. In China, you flip that around. Turnover is double digits, tenure is single digits. What companies have to do is move up a great deal in HR sophistication. You have to have better hiring programs. You have to have better training programs. You have to have better retention programs, succession planning, performance management. You have to be able to execute an excellent people strategy. I think the bottom line in China is if you don't get these people issues right, you won't have a very good bottom line. Thank you.
I'm going to open this up to questions and to comments. And I want to start with a couple of observations and a couple of questions. A couple of observations from what's already been said. I want to highlight a few things. In my class at Tsinghua, one of the questions that I'll cover right now was asked, how does my class differ from the other professors teaching at Tsinghua? My class is taught seminar style, and it's highly interactive, and you don't get in the class if you're not prepared to interact in a serious way, and if you don't interact in a serious way, I just call on you until you do. So it takes 3 or 4 weeks to get the class kind of up to speed. But what I've found is the students I had in my first year in 2003 keep coming back to the class. So they're kind of sitting in the audience creating the environment which then everyone else copies. The other professors at Tsinghua, almost without exception, are teaching lecture style, students taking notes, taking examinations, etc. My real job, or my real goal, is to make my students very comfortable with open field running, with thinking on their feet, with responding to one another, with constructive criticism, and then I spend an enormous amount of one-on-one time mentoring them in their personal careers, and they do the same for me, educating me about China. Now, one thing I tell my students is, it's not good enough for you all to be world-class. You've got to be better than world-class. The reason is this: the jobs you're about to go into are tougher than the jobs in your bog standard company somewhere in the developed world. If you were to compare, for example, I'm on the board of Ford Motor Company. Let's take the downsizing of Ford Motor Company compared to the downsizing of a SOE. I don't think there's any comparison in the level of difficulty. The SOE is much tougher. It's deeper. It's more dramatic. There's less experience with it, et cetera, et cetera. Startup company. You can start a company in California. You can start a company in Anhui Province. Well, on the one hand, you could say it's easier because the growth is as described. On the other hand, you're making it up like all entrepreneurs do, and the difference is you have no role models, or very few role models. Or another choice is you go into a multinational. Major